Welcome to Module 6 of Simple Physiology for High School. This is the beat of the heart. So we're finally arrived at the amazing mechanical organ of the body, the heart. I hope you enjoy learning as much about the heart as I enjoy teaching about it. We're going to start out with where the heart is, just to kind of remind ourselves. And we see that the heart is very much in the center of the chest, right under the breastbone, and within the rib cage to protect it. All right. You can see another picture about where the heart is, and not only that, we can remind ourselves of the other organs that are near the heart. Starting at the top here, we have the voice box. We have the thyroid gland, which has to do with metabolism, and we'll talk about that later. We have the thymus gland, which has to do with preventing disease, and we'll talk about that later also. But these tubes here we see are definitely connected down to the heart, which is right here in the middle of the chest. Here we have the left lung and the right lung. Here we have the breathing muscle, the diaphragm that we've talked about before. Here, the liver. And just on the other side of the liver, the gallbladder. You can barely see it. There it is. And, of course, this is the stomach and the spleen. So these are all organs that we've looked at before. Now we're going to take a closer look at the heart itself. The heart is inside a sac which actually lubricates the heart as it moves kind of in and out with its beating. It protects it from the other nearby organs against any friction that might develop. By the way, if I mentioned the number 100,000 relating to the heart, what do you think that would mean? 100,000. Would that mean per year? Per month? Per week? How about per day? This amazing organ beats over 100,000 times a day, and that's if you're not running around. As we zoom in a little bit more on the heart, we'll see that it has some fatty tissue here, which is fairly normal in a heart. Also, we'll see blood vessels that are in the heart itself, and these are the vessels that actually feed the heart food and oxygen that it needs. The blood that flows through the heart does not feed the heart. The heart has its own blood vessels. As a matter of fact, when older people get heart attacks, it's usually because it's these coronary blood vessels get blocked up somehow and don't supply the oxygen that the heart needs. Anyway, the other major thing we see is these very large tubes, and they are quite large. Each of these is about 1 inch across, carries a lot of blood, and in a few minutes we're going to see exactly not only what the name of these tubes are, but what kind of blood they carry and where the blood is going. Okay, so let's move that aside for a while. What I'd like to do is show some schematics of the heart. I think this is the easiest way to learn about the different parts of the heart, what the parts are called, and which way the blood is flowing through the heart. This is the right side of the heart, and this is the left side of the heart, just as if we were looking at other organs in the body. The heart has 4 chambers, or 4 hollow spaces. You've probably heard of that before. The upper chambers are called atriums, here and here, and the lower chambers are called ventricles, here and here. So there's a right atrium and a left atrium. There's a right ventricle and a left ventricle. All right. These little squiggly lines here are openings or little doors so that blood can come from outside the heart into the right atrium, pass into the right ventricle, pass out actually to the lungs, and then return and pass through this little door into the left atrium, into the left ventricle, and then out to the rest of the body. All right. And we'll see that a little bit closer in the next picture. Here again we see the two atriums, the two ventricles, okay? Now it's kind of easy to divide the heart into two sides, into a right heart and a left heart. Let's look at just the right heart for a minute here. Blood entering the right heart comes from the body cells, so it's already dumped quite a bit of its oxygen out to the cells, and let's call that oxygen poor blood. So oxygen poor blood is coming from the body cells into the right atrium, passes through this little door into the right ventricle, and then the right ventricle pushes the blood into the lungs. It makes sense because the blood is oxygen poor and it needs to go to the lungs to pick up new oxygen. All right? That's the right heart. Let's look at the left side of the heart, sometimes even called the left heart. Now the blood is returning from the lungs, so it is oxygen rich, that little plus O2. It enters the left atrium, passes into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle gives a big push and pushes the blood out through this little door out to all the body, all cells in the body, to the body cells. And again, this is oxygen-rich blood, which the body cells need. So again, we have a right heart through which oxygen-poor blood flows, and a left heart through which oxygen-rich flows. Obviously, this is one heart and it beats together, but each side of the heart has different functions. We're going to look at those big tubes that we were looking at before and give them some names now. I know that this course de-emphasizes terminology and vocabulary, but when it comes to the heart, I think it's really necessary to learn these parts, and I hope you'll bear with me. All right? Let's look at the right heart first, okay? We have blood returning from the body to the right atrium, and blood coming down from the head and the arms and the shoulders come through what's called the superior vena cava. It's a very large blood vessel. Vena refers to vein. Cava refers to a large opening, which means its diameter is big. Superior means it's coming from above, from the head area, from the shoulder area. Another tube called the inferior vena cava comes from below the lower part of the body, and it brings blood also into the right atrium. It's called inferior because the blood is coming from the lower part of the body. Both of these tubes bring blood into the right atrium, oxygen poor blood. At the right time, the blood passes through this little hole into the right ventricle, and the right ventricle contracts, pushing blood into the pulmonary artery. Now, pulmonary relates to anything relating to the lungs, and artery is any tube that leaves the heart. Okay, so the pulmonary artery is leaving the heart, and it's taking blood to the lungs, as you recall. Let's look at the left side of the heart. Now we have blood returning from the lungs, which is oxygen rich. There are 4 blood vessels, not quite as large as the other ones, called the pulmonary veins, which bring blood back to the heart from the lungs. Pulmonary, again, refers to lungs. Veins means these tubes are going to the heart, not away from the heart. So this oxygen-rich blood now enters the left atrium, passes through this little valve into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle, which is the strongest part of the heart, pushes the blood, big push, out this hole into the aorta. And this is a very, very large blood vessel, which we'll take a look at in a minute, which takes oxygen-rich blood to all of the body cells. Okay, so let's review the names again. We have superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, pulmonary artery, and over here, pulmonary veins, and the aorta. Okay, very good. Now, if we can bring this camera in very closely to this next picture, we're going to actually look at the blood vessels themselves. Okay. Here we have the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, bringing blood into the right atrium. The right atrium pushes blood into the right ventricle here. The right ventricle pushes blood up into the pulmonary artery, which is here, which branches out to the left lung over here and the right lung over here. Okay? Oxygen-rich blood returning to the heart returns through this pulmonary vein here. You see it? And this pulmonary vein here is kind of hard to see, into the left atrium. The left atrium pushes the blood into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle pushes the blood up through under this tube here into the aorta, which is right here, which comes up and curves around and goes back down behind the heart. You can't see it, but we'll see it in a future picture, okay? Let's take one more look at this, because this is, once you see the names of these, you'll be able to identify this in any picture. Superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, pulmonary artery, pulmonary veins, and the aorta. Okay, very good. Well, guess what we have here? Do you think you're able to name some of these tubes? Okay, well, what do you think this one is here? It's the superior vena cava coming down into the right atrium. What tube is this here? That's the pulmonary artery leaving the heart and going to the lungs. What's this big tube right here? That's the aorta, taking blood out to all parts of the body. See? See how easy this is? Okay. Not only that, but I think you're good enough to look at the back of the heart. Now look at the back of the heart, and you'll see the pulmonary artery coming up here, taking blood to the lungs. You see the aorta here. All right. And of course, these are the coronary blood vessels that are inside the heart, taking oxygen to the heart muscle itself. Here we see the pulmonary veins coming back into the heart from the lungs, here and here. Okay, very good. This is an interesting picture. Shows kind of how the heart is related to everything. Now, let's go through the tubes one more time, okay? We got this tube bringing oxygen-poor blood down to the heart from the head. That's the superior vena cava. We have this tube coming up from below, from the legs or the waist, and this is the inferior vena cava, okay, bringing blood to this chamber. Blood passes down to this chamber and then leaves the heart through this pulmonary artery, taking blood to the left lung over here and blood to the right lung over here. Okay. Notice the change in color here. We have oxygen, we have the blood dropping off CO2 and picking up oxygen in the lungs and returning to the heart. How does the blood return? Through these pulmonary veins here and here, back to the left side of the heart. The blood passes down into the left ventricle and then is pushed up through the aorta, which branches behind the heart and goes down the center part of the body to the lower part of the body. Okay, so physiologists sometimes say that there's two circuits here. A circuit is something that goes out and comes back again. The pulmonary circuit is the blood that going out to the lungs and back to the heart. Out to the lungs, back to the heart. Out to the lungs, back to the heart, okay? Then there's the systemic circuit, which is the circuit that takes blood out to the body systems. That's where systemic comes from. So this is the systemic circuit here. Systemic circuit. Systemic circuit. Okay. Let me show you the spelling of those. There we go. Pulmonary circuit going from the heart to the lungs. The systemic circuit going from the heart to basically the body cells, everything else other than the lungs. Okay. Now we're going to talk about something that's very important. The blood must move in one direction through the heart. It cannot be allowed to back up. And allowing this to happen, we're going to take a look at the valves of the heart. Okay. I'm going to cover up the left side of the heart. Just look at the right side of the heart as we've done before. Blood entering the right side of the heart into the left atrium, there's no valve here. The blood just flows in automatically. But here, there's a valve, and here there's a valve. A valve in this case means it only opens up one way, and if the blood tries to go back, the valve will close. Same thing here. The valve opens up one way to let the blood go this way, but if the blood tries to go back, the valve will close. All right? This valve is called a tricuspid valve. It has three little flaps, and we're going to see that shortly. This valve is the pulmonary artery valve, obviously because this takes blood into the pulmonary artery. But both of these valves open and close at the right time to allow the blood to flow only in one direction. Let's look at the left side of the heart. Also a valve here and a valve here. This valve is called the bicuspid valve. It has two flaps, bi meaning two, and it opens and closes at the right time. And there's the aortic valve, which means the blood is going into the aorta, and you want to be sure that that blood does not back up back into the left ventricle after it leaves. Okay? So to sum up, we have four valves in the heart. Here, 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 and here. This is the tricuspid valve. This is the pulmonary artery valve. This is the bicuspid valve. And this is the aortic valve. Okay, very good. Let's move on. In this next picture, we see the tricuspid valve is right here. The bicuspid valve is right here. These little strings are attached to the valve and make sure that the valve doesn't shut too far and go too far when it closes, kind of like an umbrella that's inside out. Don't want that to happen. Okay? That's what the strings are for. The other valves are kind of hard to see right now, and we'll get another picture and try to see what those are. By the way, look at the musculature of the left ventricle here. There's no coincidence that this is the heaviest part, the thickest part of the heart, because the left ventricle has to pump blood out to all of the body, whereas the right ventricle here only has to pump blood to the lungs. This is a little better picture showing here the tricuspid valve, bicuspid valve. This is the this is the pulmonary artery, so this has to be the pulmonary artery valve right here. Doesn't show the aortic valve. It's kind of hidden. It's right in here, kind of hard to see. Again, look at the musculature of the left ventricle. Okay. When you hold your hand over your heart to pledge allegiance or any other reason, the reason the heart feels like it's on the left side is you feel the power of the left ventricle contracting. By the way, as long as we're here, what's this? Superior vena cava. What's this? Inferior vena cava. What's this? Pulmonary artery. What's this? Aorta. Very good. Okay. Here's a real nice picture of the heart valves. Here we have the bicuspid valve, tricuspid. Notice 3 little leaves make it the tricuspid. Here we have 2 leaves or flaps making it the bicuspid valve. This is the pulmonary artery valve here, and this is the aortic valve here. Remember, the purpose of the valves is to keep blood flowing only in one direction. You don't let it back up. And here's a picture of the valves themselves. This is a pulmonary artery valve, and this is an aortic valve. They're quite large because these tubes are quite large themselves, again about 1 inch across. Okay, we're going to move on to kind of a different part of a different topic of the heart, I should say, and that is what makes the heart contract. And the answer is electricity. Now, the body is able to generate small amounts of electricity, especially in the nerves. And when that electricity stimulates muscle, the muscle contracts. And the heart being a muscle, the same thing happens to the heart. There is a little bundle of nerves right here called the pacemaker, all right? And when the heart is ready to beat, this pacemaker sends a current of electricity out in a wave over the atriums like this. As soon as the atriums sense or feel that electricity, they both contract at the same time. Okay? Then, about half a second later, another little bundle of nerves right here sends another wave of electricity down the center of the heart and up the sides of the heart like this, making both ventricles contract at the same time. Okay? Now, when the atriums contract, they push downward. They push the blood down into the ventricles. But when the ventricles contract, if I can get my fingers in here, the blood actually is pushed upward into the pulmonary artery and into the aorta. I highly advise you to go online to Wikipedia and look up the heart, because they have a terrific moving heart, which I simply can't show you in my course here. And once you have this background from me, I think you'll appreciate all the moving parts of a moving heart. Okay. Now, sometimes what happens is you'll go to the doctor and the doctor will give you what's called an electrocardiogram. This is where they hook some electrodes on your chest, and the electrical activity of your heart comes up to your skin, and actually you can pick that up on a special machine, the electrical activity of the heart. And of course, like when you're in a hospital, and the patient is in bed, and you look at the heart machine, and it goes beep, 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 like that. Well, this is the actual tracings, electrical tracing, on the electrocardiogram. Here we see P wave followed by an QRS wave and then a T wave. Now, if you're really smart, you'll figure out where this code came from to use these letters, because no one really knows where this actually came from. But some doctor just figured out, why not use the alphabet to show the electrical activity of the heart. This little bump right here shows the atriums when they're contracting. This huge spike right here shows the ventricles when they're contracting. And then this other little bump right here shows the ventricles when the pacemaker is kind of regenerating, ready to discharge again. All right. So this is this whole thing. It would be one heartbeat, and the doctor, the cardiologist, that's what a heart specialist is, cardiologist, will be able to see by how long this is, by how high it is, by how high this is, by how with the interval here. They can tell a lot about how your valves are working and how your chambers are pushing the blood through, and be able to actually diagnose certain heart diseases just from this electrocardiogram. Here's another nice shot of that, a little bit different color. Again, P, Q, R, S wave, and the T wave, part of the electrocardiogram. Okay. We're going to move to something that's kind of interesting, a little bit advanced, but I think you can follow me along with this. What we have here, I'll get a piece of paper, is a schematic of the heart action. And one heartbeat takes about 8/10 of a second. All right. So up here on the x-axis, what we have is one heartbeat going 8/10 of a second. And as we go down into the y-axis here, we'll see the events that are going on in the heart. Okay. So I'm going to come down here, and what are we seeing here? We are seeing the pressure, the blood pressure inside the ventricles. So at first, at the beginning of the heart, there's no pressure at all. Then as the ventricles contract, the blood pressure goes way up, and then as the blood is leaving the ventricles, it comes back down, and then this is a period where the ventricles are refilling with blood, and then the next contraction shows the blood pressure in the ventricle going way up and then way down again. And this is on a time scale here, okay? Let's see what's happening in the next part of the heart movement. This would be the heart volume, the volume of the blood in the heart. And at first, you see it's fairly high, and then as the ventricles contract, what happens to the blood volume? It goes way down. Why is that? Because the blood is leaving the heart. The blood is leaving the ventricles. And then the ventricles start to fill again, and then they contract again, and the blood volume goes down because the blood is leaving the ventricles, and then it repeats itself. Okay? Here we see the electrical activity of the heart. Here's one beat. There's the next beat. So this interval from here to here, again, is about 8/10 of a second. All right? What do you think we're looking at here? Well, these are the heart sounds. Lub-dub, lub-dub. Okay? And again, they're in concert with being 8/10 of a second, one heartbeat. The lub is the closing of the valves between the atriums and the ventricles. That's the lub. The dub is the closing of the pulmonary and aortic valves. There's no sound when the valves open, only when the valves close. All right? So, very good. We're going to move on to something a little bit different now. We're going to talk about the heart rate. In other words, how fast the heart beats. Okay? Called heart rate. This is also the same thing as the pulse. If the doctor or nurse holds your wrist and feels the pulse at your wrist, that's the same thing as the heart rate, because when the blood leaves the heart and goes out into the major arteries, it's like a wave going down, and so if you feel a pulse, it's the same thing as feeling the heartbeat. Okay? Let's see what the heart rate is. When you're sleeping, it's likely to be around 60 beats a minute. Why would that be? Well, because your metabolic rate is so low. There's no activity going on except your breathing and your heartbeat and so on. And so there's no need for very much blood to go out to your body cells. However, during the day, your normal activities of getting up and walking around and doing work and so on, your heart rate is likely to be about 72 beats per minute. Okay, this is regarded as normal and average. However, under exercise, you take a run around the track, your pulse is likely to go up to 150 or 180 beats per minute, which is normal because your leg muscles are requiring a lot of blood because of the oxygen and glucose necessary for your leg muscles to work. So this would be normal if you are running. The highest pulse, the highest heart rate recorded is around 220, but that's very unusual, and I think that was in a 16-year-old girl. Obviously, if you go too high, the heart simply can't beat that much and push that amount of blood. So there is an upper level of how fast the heart can beat. But this gives you an idea of what's normal under different metabolic circumstances. Okay? Let's see. Here we go. This is something that's very interesting. Scientists have actually figured out what the volume of the ventricles is. In other words, each time the ventricle contracts, how much blood does it push out? And they've come up with about 70 milliliters of blood each time your heart contracts. Each time your ventricles push out, each ventricle pushes out 70 milliliters of blood. What does that look like? Well, I've got a little sauce bowl here, and there's a quarter to give you a sense of how big that is. And I'm going to show you about how much blood your heart pumps out each beat. There you go. Right there. Okay? Ta-da! Okay. You see it first on Dave's course on simple physiology. Okay. So, if your ventricle is pumping out 70 milliliters per beat and your heart rate is 72 beats per minute, well, then how much blood is passing through your heart per minute? Well, you just multiply the two numbers there, and you get a little over 5,000 milliliters of blood per minute. Now recall, what is the volume of blood in your body? It's 5 liters. So this means for the average person at average normal activity, the complete amount of blood flows through your heart in 1 minute. 5 liters. Okay? Well, that's interesting, but what if you're doing some activity? Here we see Under normal circumstances, your amount of blood flowing through your heart would be around 5,000 milliliters per minute. But if you're exercising, look what happens. First of all, your heart rate can increase to, say, 150 times a minute. That's very normal. Look, you're running around the track, okay? But here's what's very interesting. Your ventricles can actually enlarge a little bit, from about 70 to 170 milliliters, because of the tremendous need for blood throughout your body. If you multiply these two numbers together, you get 25,000 milliliters, which is 25 liters. Now, how can 25 liters flow through your heart in 1 minute if you only have 5 liters of blood? Well, it's the same 5 liters going through 5 times in a minute. And this number is called the cardiac output. It's something that gives the doctors and the scientists some sense of how well your heart is working under circumstances of exercise. This person would have a cardiac output of 25 and a half liters. Okay, very good. Here's something, the first time I heard it, I found it hard to believe. And that is, when the heart is beating, when the heart is working, do you think it works more or it rests more? Remember, part of the heart cycle, the blood is just flowing into the heart. And the other part of the heart cycle, the blood is being pushed out. The pushed out part is the work. The inflow of blood is the rest. Well, the point I'm making is the heart actually rests more than it works. And I'll prove it to you. It takes 0.8 of a second for a complete contraction of the heart. Okay? During that contraction, 0.3 of the time, the left ventricle is contracting, but 0.5 of the time, it's filling with blood. In other words, it's relaxing. So you can see the heart actually rests more than it works. Rests more than it works. Okay. We're going to wrap up our coverage of the heart with a little practical, a couple of practical facts. First of all, let's talk about a heart attack. You've all heard of a heart attack in the movies and so on. How is a heart attack different from a cardiac arrest? What do you think? Same thing? Well, similar. In a heart attack, the heart is still pumping. It's very important. The heart is still pumping, but it's not pumping effectively. Usually the electrical activity is kind of gone haywire, and instead of a nice beat that goes woom ba ba woom ba ba woom ba ba, it goes like that, kind of a quiver. All right, and so usually what happens is part of the heart dies. Maybe there's a plugged up, one of the arteries leading to the heart is plugged up. It's one of the heart's own blood vessels is plugged up, and part of the heart is not getting enough oxygen, and that part of the heart dies, and that's what causes a heart attack. The rest of the heart is working okay, but part of the heart is dead, has died, and this causes fibrillation. Now, fibrillation, if you watch my fingers, is kind of like this. Is that effective beating of the heart? No, not at all. And what happens is the doctors will shock the heart. You've seen that in the movies where they take 2 paddles and they shock the heart. What they're trying to do is to shock the pacemaker into getting back into the correct electrical activity so the heart can beat correctly. That's what they're trying to do there. Okay? Let's look at another situation similar to heart attack, but this is called cardiac arrest. How is this different? Well, in cardiac arrest, the heart stops beating completely, all right? There could be a number of reasons. It could be loss of blood, it could be drugs, lots of different things, shock, electrical shock. But the heart has stopped completely. Now, how long does this guy have to live without oxygen? Because we've talked about that before. He has about 5 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes, before his brain cells start dying. So he needs oxygen right away, okay? Now, cardiac arrest, what they will do is they will shock the heart in order to get it to start, okay? So in this case, they're shocking the pacemaker directly, saying, wake up, pacemaker, and start an electrical charge toward the heart, because if you don't do this, this guy is dead, okay? And that's why they shock the person who has heart has stopped completely. The last thing we're going to take a look at today is something you've all heard about, CPR. You've probably seen emergency people do this, maybe even lay people. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Okay, let's look at the spelling there. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation. All right. The idea behind this is to keep blood moving through the heart to give oxygen to the brain. So, and I'm not going to go over it in this course because it's a little bit too complicated, but I advise you to look at a video online and see how this is done. Basically, you are compressing the breastbone about 2 inches down, which of course compresses the heart. And remember, the heart valves only allow blood to flow in one direction, right? So by pushing on the heart, you are keeping the blood flowing in this victim's body, especially up to his brain. And the whole idea of CPR is to keep oxygen going to this person's brain until the emergency people can arrive and take over, okay? So, again, I've enjoyed covering the heart with you in this module, and I look forward to our next module where we are going to take a look at the blood vessels and blood pressure, and even what the blood has to do with body temperature. So I invite you to come back to our next module on the blood vessels, and until then, this is Dave saying goodbye.